Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we're continuing our look into the latest generation of high refresh IPS gaming monitors with a review of the Asus TUF Gaming VG279QM, which a few people have been requesting that we take a look at. I've already been quite impressed with how some other 1080p 240Hz IPS displays have performed, namely the MSI MAG251RX and the LG 27GN750, so it'll be interesting to see how this Asus alternative fares. There are some unique features Asus are providing with the VG279QM and some inclusions that I'd class as high-end, which is a bit unusual for Asus's TUF brand that is normally positioned as a value purchase. One is the ability to overclock this monitor from 240Hz to 280Hz. And another is ELMB sync, which allows you to use the backlight strobing and adaptive sync at the same time. When paired with what Asus claims is a 1 millisecond gray-to-gray response time, we're set for very high levels of performance. With all of these features on board, including G-Sync compatible certification, Asus are claiming this is the world's fastest gaming monitor, which probably is correct if they are strictly referring to the refresh rate. On the other hand, they've also touted support for HDR technology through Display HDR 400 certification. However, this isn't an HDR display in any sense of the word, as it lacks most of the necessary hardware features. Monitors can be hard to come by these days, with most models in high demand, so you could find it difficult to actually buy a VG279QM or any alternative right now. But it has a list price of $400 US, putting it in competition with the 27GN750 and making it a tad more expensive than the MAG251RX, although that's a smaller display. Speaking of size, I've mentioned before that I find 27 inches a little too large for a monitor that only packs a 1920 by 1080 resolution. I feel the sweet spot or even maximum size for that resolution is 24 to 25 inches. The pixel density isn't great here, however Asus do offer a 24.5 inch alternative to this display in the VG259QM, all the same features including a 280Hz refresh rate and the same class of panel from AU Optronics. This doesn't mean that 27 and 24 inch monitors will perform the same, but it's worth pointing out there are two models in this lineup if you are interested. The design Asus have gone with here is quite similar to their other TUF gaming displays, and it's one that I quite like. It's not as aggressive or over the top as their ROG products, it's a bit easier on the eyes, but still with enough gamer elements that you won't mistake this for a boring office monitor. However, unlike the ROG lineup, the outer-facing materials for this display are almost all plastic. It doesn't look bad or anything, but metal often gives it a premium touch. Decent stand adjustability here, including the full complement of height, tilt, swivel and pivot support. I'd have liked a bit more height available, but it still ends up quite decent and has VESA mounting support should you need it. It's a sturdy feeling display stand too, despite all the moving parts. Asus offers a directional toggle for controlling the on-screen display on the right side of the monitor, plus a few quick access buttons. Asus software stack built into their screens is top-notch and includes a wide array of gamer-specific features, including crosshairs, timers, refresh rate displays, shadow boosting modes, and even a sniper mode. It's easy to navigate too. Asus just know what they're doing with this sort of thing. For inputs, we're getting two HDMI 2.0 ports and DisplayPort 1.2. The HDMI ports are limited to 240Hz, so if you're interested in overclocking the monitor and running it at 280Hz, you'll need to be using DisplayPort. On top of that, there are built-in speakers, which are pretty garbage quality and must only be there for emergency use or something like that. Alright, let's get into the all-important response time testing, and in typical Asus fashion, they are offering 6 overdrive modes labeled 0 through 100. Let's quickly go through the basics and then focus on a few of these options because half of them really aren't worth talking about. The 0 overdrive mode is overdrive disabled, not much going on here, response time average of 5.64 milliseconds, pretty good for native panel performance. 20 is also quite mild on the overdrive front. The 40 mode is where things heat up a little bit. We're now reaching a sub 5 millisecond gray-to-gray average at 280Hz, although this isn't quite fast enough to get a true 280Hz experience. There is an incredibly tight 3.57 millisecond refresh window requirement here, so only 50% of transitions get close to this in this mode. Stepping up to overdrive 60 presents an interesting situation that I've never seen before with a monitor that I've tested. This mode, despite being a higher listed overdrive mode, is actually slower on average than overdrive 40. Asus appears to change the way they implement overdrive for levels 40 and below compared to 60 and above, which creates a different experience. The performance difference isn't massive, but slower is slower. Overdrive 80 is where you want to be sitting for gaming at the maximum refresh rate. Response times fall to 3.82 milliseconds on average, and there's no appreciable overshoot. We are only getting around 75% refresh rate compliance, so this is a borderline 280Hz experience, but in practice, it is a slight step up from 240Hz. Then at Overdrive 100, we see a typical situation where to achieve a 1 millisecond greater grey response time in their marketing materials, they've blown out overshoot levels to the point where the mode is pretty much unusable. So Overdrive 80 is the best for gaming at the maximum refresh rate, but it isn't as suitable for lower refresh rates. In my testing, I found the mode to be fine up until 200Hz or so, but when dropping to 144Hz and below, we start to get significant levels of overshoot. While response times are consistently between 3 and 4 milliseconds, at any refresh rate below 144Hz, you'll easily spot inverse ghosting. For gaming across the adaptive sync range, we're then left with two options. We've got OD40 and OD60. As I mentioned a moment ago, the 60 mode is actually slower on average, and this holds throughout the entire refresh range. While 60 delivers around a 5.2 millisecond greater grey average at most refresh rates, Overdrive 40 is more around 4.6 milliseconds, so roughly 10 to 15% faster. And from the response time charts, you can see how the Overdrive implementation seems to change between the two options. OD40 also fares a little better at lower refresh rates than OD60. At 85Hz, for example, OD60 produces an average error of 5%, with 15% of transitions producing noticeable inverse ghosting. With OD40, the average error is slightly lower, and we have just 8% of transitions with inverse ghosting. This is again despite OD40 being faster overall. This leaves the VG279QM with two overdrive mode choices depending on how you are using the monitor. At high refresh rates, you'll want to use OD80 for the best clarity above 200Hz, and for lower refresh rates, at 144Hz or below, Overdrive 40 is the best way to go. However, this mode isn't fast enough to deliver a true 280Hz experience at the top end. Ultimately, there's no single overdrive mode that's the best for the entire refresh range. I'd probably stick to 40 if you're only occasionally going above 200Hz, but for esports titles like Fortnite and Overwatch on a high-performance PC, yeah, 80 is what you should use. Let's compare the VG279QM to some other high refresh monitor options. This chart shows the maximum performance you can get out of a monitor, and what's interesting is that despite the 27GN750 and VG279QM using different panels, both perform very similarly in terms of response times, both around that 3.8 millisecond mark. The Asus variant is a bit faster, of course, being able to hit a 280Hz refresh rate instead of 240Hz. The MSI MAG251RX uses the smaller 24.5-inch AU Optronics panel and is a little more aggressive on the overdrive, allowing it to perform slightly better. The inherent differences between each of these three models is pretty small though, and performance is largely dictated by how well tuned the overdrive controls are. Then we have TN options, which in general are a step above in terms of response time performance. These 0.5 millisecond class panels can typically offer 3 millisecond response times throughout the entire refresh rate range without many overdrive concerns, and would be the go-to choice for those that care more about performance than any color qualities. Let's pull up a direct comparison between these monitors across the refresh range. First up, here is the VG279QM's modes put in the one chart, and you'll see here that Overdrive 40 is the best for adaptive sync overall. Then when we put the 27GN750 and MAG251RX in the charts using their best adaptive sync modes, honestly there's not much between these panels, half a millisecond at best and a few percentage points for overshoot. The MSI model is slightly better at the low end, and all three require an overdrive mode change to get the best performance at their maximum refresh rate, so there's no standout here. With refresh rate compliance, the VG279QM does suffer a little bit in striving for a 280Hz refresh rate, which is why it sits a bit lower than other 240Hz IPS monitors in this chart. While 280Hz is a borderline experience, 240Hz is easily achievable with over 90% refresh rate compliance. In fact, speaking of this difference, is 280Hz even worth it? Well, for starters, a 280Hz panel is only 17% faster in terms of maximum refresh rate than a 240Hz panel, which at these sorts of refresh rates is hard to distinguish between. Here's some pursuit camera tests with Blurbuster's UFO image, and on the VG279QM, the 280Hz image is slightly clearer, but honestly the difference is pretty small, and I don't think 280Hz is worth much of a price premium over 240Hz. Back to the charts, we also have average error rates, which are well managed for the VG279QM while delivering maximum performance. Then at 60Hz, say you have a console input or something like that, again, the Asus model performs very similarly to the LG 27GN750 in offering around that 4.5 millisecond mark on average. The MSI MAG251RX is a step above in this regard, offering a unique high-performance experience with the 60Hz mode. Then we get to input lag, and I found no issues here operating at 280Hz. This is a very responsive monitor with next to no input lag concerns at that refresh rate. I did find the monitor was a bit slower in terms of input lag at 60Hz and refresh rates below 100Hz, at least with fixed refreshes. Not sure what the cause is there, but the 27GN750 didn't have that same problem. The other major selling point to the VG279QM is ELMB sync, which attempts to deliver backlight strobing with adaptive sync simultaneously. Having backlight strobing only at a fixed refresh rate is a major limitation of the technology in my eyes, so I appreciate Asus trying to innovate to fix this significant downside of using strobing. While the implementation is decent compared to similar IPS monitors, if there are issues with strobe crosstalk or double images, I don't think the mode is worth using. The VG279QM does produce minor image repetition while using ELMB sync at a variety of refresh rates, and this can be distracting while gaming compared to just the regular non-strobed mode. However, these artifacts are less noticeable than on a monitor like the MAG251RX, so it's far from the worst offender. Personally, I wouldn't use this mode given it's intended to produce a crystal clear image while gaming, and it kinda doesn't do that. But other people might be less sensitive to these artifacts, and it might depend on the game you're playing. The implementation here needed a bit more work to achieve what it set out to achieve. Moving into color performance now, and there's nothing particularly unique about this IPS offering given it's just a standard sRGB display. This is identical to the other high refresh 240Hz options I've tested, which also only offer an sRGB gamut. However, at least in the case of my review unit, Asus has done a great job of calibrating this monitor out of the box for grayscale performance. The CCT curve is reasonably flat and the monitor follows the sRGB gamma curve to a good degree. This leads to an impressive Delta E ITP average of 2.94 or just 1.29 using the old Delta E2000 metric. This is an excellent result for a gaming display out of the box with no appreciable color tint. Saturation performance isn't quite as good, but it's not due to the unclamped gamut. Instead, there is a small amount of drift at higher saturation levels, seen in some of the blue and green results specifically. Nothing overly bad, but a saturation Delta E ITP average of 6.22 could be improved. However, this isn't something that OSD controls can tackle. Similar story for color checker. The overall Delta E ITP average is decent, but nothing mind-blowing. I wasn't able to improve performance through OSD tweaks, so the next step is a full color calibration, which will hopefully address some of the small color drift issues that we saw. And it does that quite nicely, while also improving grayscale accuracy to a Delta E ITP average below 2.0. Saturation is also below 2.0 now, only limited by the panel not quite being able to hit 99% sRGB coverage. Then for color checker, we see standard results from a calibrated IPS panel, which is to say performance is very strong. As always, Patreon members can download the calibrated color profile we created for test purposes. Your experiences will vary due to panel variances, but it could be worth checking out anyway. The VG279QM is capable of great brightness levels around the 400 nit mark after calibration, which is in keeping with its display HDR 400 certification. This should be suitable for most use cases. And then for contrast ratios, pretty standard stuff from an AU Optronics IPS at around the 1000:1 mark. This is better than the 27GN750, which uses an LG Nano IPS panel. The one's known to have weaker contrast, but it's not as good as the MAG251RX. I was actually expecting the VG279QM to perform more in line with the MSI monitor and I have seen some reviews showing contrast around 10% higher than what I was able to achieve, so it seems my unit is on the lower side for what this panel can achieve, but I'm still satisfied with around that 1000:1 mark. If you want higher contrast, you'll have to sacrifice speed and go for a VA panel instead. Viewing angles are excellent, no complaints there, and uniformity was very good with my monitor as well. Not quite as solid for dark greys, but for full white, almost the entire display is the same, with only slight fall off along the left edge with my unit. When you buy an IPS, you expect great uniformity, and that's what you get. As for IPS glow, nothing unusual with my unit to report. There is a little bit of it there, but that's fairly standard for IPS monitors. I mentioned at the start of this review that the VG279QM comes display HDR 400 certified, but realistically, this monitor cannot provide an HDR experience. Without local dimming, the single frame contrast ratio cannot get even close to high enough for the requirements of HDR, while brightness isn't good enough and there's no wide gamut support. This monitor fails all three requirements of HDR. Overall though, this is another solid showing for high refresh rate IPS monitors. I've now tested 3 1080p displays that all hit or exceeded 240Hz and all deliver great performance at that refresh rate. While TN panels still hold the overall performance crown, there is now genuine competition to this display type, and buyers now have great options available that don't require sacrificing color quality. The Asus TUF Gaming VG279QM performs almost identically to other 1080p 240Hz IPS displays I've tested, so there's no clear winner from a response time perspective. No model I've reviewed is perfect. You'll need to change overdrive modes depending on whether you're gaming at super high or moderate refresh rates, but in general I was impressed with the performance you're getting here. These panels are easily good enough for 240Hz, and in the case of the VG279QM, borderline capable of 280Hz. While the upgrade from 240 to 280Hz is pretty small in most instances, given performance is otherwise the same between, say, the VG279QM and LG 27GN750, suddenly that slight bump to refresh rate becomes a selling point. Normally I'd just say the difference is negligible and not to bother factoring it into your buying decision, but in this case I feel the 280Hz refresh rate gives Asus an edge in performance. What is less of a selling point is ELMB sync, which due to double image issues only has limited usability, although it is better than other implementations I've seen on similar IPS monitors. LG doesn't include this feature at all on their display, so Asus again does provide something extra if you want to use it, but it's not as large of a selling point as I'd have liked to see. Everything else about this monitor is pretty good as well. Fantastic factory calibration, great brightness, better contrast than the 27GN750, a neat functional design with plenty of OSD features. I guess advertising HDR when it's not HDR capable is a bummer, but not a huge deal, and outside of that the only other concern I have is the size, but again, there's the smaller VG259QM if you want a higher pixel density. Based on what I've seen so far, I'd say this is the best high refresh 1080p IPS monitor on the market, and given its competitive $400 price doesn't make it any more expensive than other options, it's the display that I would recommend. And if the 24.5-inch variant delivers similar performance, that could be an even better choice when it hits the market. But either way, Asus has done a great job with this monitor, and they continue to offer awesome value in their TUF monitor range. And that's it for this review of the Asus TUF Gaming VG279QM. Hopefully you have all the information now that you need to go buy a nice high refresh rate IPS gaming monitor. This is a great one with that 280Hz refresh rate, nice and smooth, very clear images with that response time combination as well. So yeah, as I said, one that I would recommend. So yeah, that's it. If you want to check out more of our display reviews, I'd recommend subscribing, checking all that stuff out. We do have our Patreon page as well. Links to that are in the description below, and I'll catch you in the next one.